Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this is the podcast for you. Hey legends, welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, Ayden and I are jumping in on another fallow deer and red deer based topic. And it's for when times aren't going right. The rut is just around the corner. And what we're going to be focusing on today is when the rut's quiet, it's a silent roar. You know, we hear it all the time, like what's happening. And you're just not getting the results. The vocalizations aren't quite as high, and you're sort of struggling to turn up opportunities which then lead to you struggling to, be successful on a hunt. You've just taken all this time off from friends and family, and you're out there and just sort of feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall. So we're trying to share some of our previous rut stories and tips and tactics to shed some light on what you may be seeing out in the field, and hopefully increase the opportunities and chances that you get coming up on this rut. So this one's going to be an awesome one. We know you'll take a lot away from it. So sit back and enjoy. With the rut nearly here, it's time to restock your supplies. And for us, look no further than Koyoga Broadheads. Ayden's shooting the 150 grain Zots while I'm shooting the 150 grain pilot cuts with bleeders. Whether you're shooting a Zot, an old school, or a pilot cut, we have complete confidence in their range, and we know you guys are going to love them too. Use code TWIN10, that is TWIN, 10 numerically, to get 10% off your next order and stock up for the rut now.
So I think it's important to obviously talk about some of the factors leading to a quiet rut. And this one that I'm going to start off fresh off the top is hunting pressure. Now, I don't think we give enough importance to hunting pressure, especially if you listen back to our fallow rut tactics podcast. We speak so heavily on, factors that lead to doe estrus cycles and all these sorts of things. And again, translated that into what we see out in the field during the fallow deer rut, like pre-rut, peak rut, and then post-rut and all that type of stuff. But hunting pressure is this massive blanket that you can just throw over, your hunting experiences, and it's going to change things so dramatically. Obviously there's a lot of environmental factors that change year to year, but hunting pressure is another thing. Like it can change daily, it can change weekly, it can change monthly. Even if the property owner that you're on a large parcel of land has started doing things slightly differently, like whether they have now got extra pack of dogs that they use to muster instead of bikes, or they have put cattle in a paddock that over the last 10 ruts that you've been hunting have never had cattle in those paddocks. Like the deer kind of do react to our human presence, and especially things that, we might not take as a serious factor, can often have quite large repercussions and effects on these deer and wild creatures.
Following on from all the topics that we really dive deep into on the fallow deer topics was around nutrition, and obviously if does are not in great condition, then they're not going to be cycling. So that's one factor that you should have in the back of your mind. Like what's the sort of summer conditions and autumn conditions been leading up to this rut? Like maybe the does just aren't in the best condition. They're going to cycle later this year. Equally, like all the environmental factors. So we talked about moon phase, talked about like really adverse or like, crappy weather, like has it been pissing down with rain, thunderstorms, that sort of thing, where you might even not be able to hear roars or bucks croaking. But definitely the big one environmentally is also just warmer temperatures. Like we spoke about these stags and definitely the bucks being athletes, where like for the whole rut, that's sort of their arena, I guess, where they've been getting into condition all year for this sort of peak period. And if the temperatures are really hot, like we use the analogy, like would you rather run a marathon in 30 degrees or 5 degrees? And it's sort of like these guys, like, they're almost going to be sluggish, as we've described before. And so if you're getting those really warmer midday temperatures, like you might see that you get an hour or two of croaking in the morning, and then that's sort of it for the day. And then everything else just sort of locks down. It doesn't mean that the bucks disappear and the stags disappear. It just means that the hunting gets a lot more difficult when they're not saying, I'm over here, I'm over here, I'm over here. And that's some of the stuff that we're going to discuss and break down for you guys today.
Another thing that may change from year to year, particularly on blocks that are smaller in size, where you're not particularly managing it for, trophy potential and things like that, and just the deer population in general, could be like a decreased buck to doe ratio. So that's essentially if you've got less bucks to the amount of does, and ideally you want to be running this as tight as possible. Like 1-to-1 is the absolute best, or 1-to-2, 1-to-3 would be pretty ideal. So for every buck, there's 2 to 3 does. And that's going to see a lot more tight and succinct sort of rutting period, where those does are going to be cycling and coming into season. The bucks are going to be breeding them, and you'll typically get more heightened rutting activity during that period. The bucks are going to have to display and essentially like give off their dominance, which we often see as those vocalizations and sort of rutting displays. What will happen if that buck to doe ratio like goes too low? And we alluded to this on the previous podcast, where if your buck to doe ratio is going like 1-to-10, 1-to-15, 1-to-20, which it certainly can in certain places when the doe numbers are so high, is that there's simply no need to fight between the bucks. There's no need to essentially rut and display this dominance, because the does are abundant, and regardless of what they do, they can save their energy. It's the same as, for us, there's no point running around looking fit and prime and stuff like that if you can sit on the couch, put no effort in, and still, tempt your partner, for example. Whereas if they're kicking all their goals and you've got to go and actually put on, a bit of effort and appearance and make yourself look nice and presentable and fight for their attraction, it's going to be, a lot more visual displays and vocalizations and things like this. So relating to that also is the age structure of the bucks and the stags in the population. So if you notice that in some instances here in Australia, we're experiencing more chopper deer culling of animals, and it's often the bucks in their summer ranges when they're going off and doing their velvet periods and things, they'll bachelor up, and it makes them quite easy and exposed to be shot by helicopters. If a lot of those animals are older animals or just bucks in general, you might be taking the top 20 or 30% of maturity and mature animals that know how to rut, know where to rut, all these types of things. And then the does, because they do have that feminine selection criteria where the does do come back to the bucks and then choose their mate. If they're going up to young bucks, like the young bucks aren't going to be croaking and stuff and putting on as much of a visual display as the older bucks, because they're just surprised that they're getting does at this point. Like if you can imagine a 2 or 3 year old buck that's never had does previously is now inundated with all these females, they're not going to be rutting, they're just going to be trying to breed. So that can also affect, the noise and abundance of noise during the rut.
Speaking from personal experience here, I think the factor that definitely gets to me when I think, it's going to be a quiet rut or things aren't happening as well as they should. Like we spoke about these peak rutting periods sort of being like late March, early April for reds, and probably more like sort of mid-April for fallow deer. And for me, I always sort of try and take off like all of April and even like maybe some days in March and stuff to start hunting the rut. And the problem is, I think often in those first couple of days, because I give myself so much time, I think generally speaking, the rut hasn't even really started yet. Like you're seeing all the signs and demonstrations that the rut is there and about to kick off, but you don't really get that like positive reinforcement from, stags roaring and bucks croaking yet, maybe for like another week, where you've just got this beautiful window where like scrapes are being touched up, there's rubs everywhere, like the whole mountain looks like it's just glowing in fresh rubs, and you're flat out like turning up, a mature buck or something like that when you feel like they should be well and truly croaking. Another thing is social media is a bit of a trap for all this, for all the benefits that it has. You sort of do get caught up in the fact that like there'll be someone on social media that has really high and like a really good property for red deer or fallow deer or whatever, and they're like putting up videos every day of like passing up like great bucks and great stags and stuff, and they've been croaking and roaring and blah 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 from like the 15th of 20th of March, and you're seeing people getting in, having all this exciting opportunities, and probably shooting big bucks and reds and stuff already, and you're sitting there flat out being like, I can't even find a buck, like, oh shit, like my rut's almost over, and you start like thinking all these thoughts. And like it hasn't even got to the 1st of April yet, or you're just like in the first couple of days of April and you got like a couple of weeks of hunting. And so I think like definitely just having that mindset where I know for me, like I've got caught in that trap for a couple of years where I've almost given myself too much time and sort of got sucked in before the peak rut that we discuss. has really kicked off. Like you start having these thoughts. It's like, oh, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. It's like, well, from my previous experience, like, you know, and like we've discussed, like the rut always happens. It's just like to what spectrum and the severity of like the vocalizations that we often term the rut. And yeah, it always does come around. So I mean, just like sort of sit on your haunches, like just wait, it will come. It may just be a bit later than what you expected for all the above factors that we listed before.
The other thing is, like, as James said, it will come and it may come and whatnot, but like it might actually be different to previous years. There are so many factors affecting like the visual representation of what we term the rut, whereas the does are all going to be read regardless, as we've said. Whereas, you know, the visual cues that we play off might be slightly different from year to year. Like they might, like for instance, if you rock up and you've only got the weekend to hunt April 1st to 3rd, for example, and last year it was peak rut, they were going absolutely wild. There were reds roaring, fallow bucks croaking, hopefully, all that type of stuff. And you rock up to the same place and potentially haven't done that much scouting this year, or the vegetation's slightly different, or again, the farmer put his cows in the paddock adjacent to your little area. Whatever one of these factors could have changed it slightly, where instead of like, because you've only got limited time, you rock up to that very patch of soil to hunt those deer. What you might have to find is that instead of just referring to old habits and going, oh shit, they're not croaking, and then, you know, going, oh, it's going to be a quiet rut, they're not quite ready or whatever, they could be rutting a kilometre up the valley and just doing it slightly different because of whatever, like hunting pressure again is like a factor that's going to change animals, particularly the red stags where they do move and aren't dedicated to a patch of turf. Fallow bucks are more likely to return to an area. So there's so many factors here, which is what we're alluding to. And like I've even gone to a particular spot on a ridge and sat there and gone, oh, it's quiet, nothing's calling on first light. And then you wrap them 100 metres around the ridge and you start hearing croaks. And then you run back to the boys who are sitting 100 metres where you were. It might have even been to go and, you know, take a leak or go to the toilet or something like that. And you run back to where the boys were and you're like, oh, there's a buck croaking over here. And they're like, what? I haven't heard anything. And it's just moving 100 metres can give you such a different perspective, like with the audio, like acoustics of a buck croaking. So there are so many different things that, you know, we'll talk up to here in a second, and strategies for hunting if things are a little bit different to normal and are potentially a little bit quiet, because, you know, not every rut is going to be absolutely, you know, action-packed and, you know, much to our disgust, obviously, as hunters, because it's this highly anticipated time of the year where for 12 months we sort of have this build-up and we're all taking time off, we're all talking to our partners, we're looking back at old footage, photos, we're talking, hopefully getting fit and ready and all these things leading up to it. But sometimes it doesn't live up to expectations, but going and acknowledging like, okay, that's fine, it's hunting at the end of the day. Let's see what strategies we can implement to still make it a successful rut. Specialising in high-quality supplements and nutrition, from electrolytes and hydration add-ins to their wild bars, Atlas Wild helps to fuel our outdoor adventures. Their Regenerate lineup has been a game changer whilst hunting up north in the heat and humidity. It's perfect for those on the quest for hydration when losing lots of sweat. With grape, lemon lime, blue raspberry and orange flavours, there's something for everyone. Another favourite of mine is their Fusion lineup. It's my go-to for rest and recovery towards the end of a day. It's perfect for a big pack out. Now available in peach iced tea and lemon lime flavours. When shopping on the Atlas Wild website, be sure to use code TWIN10. That's TWIN 10 numerically for 10% off your next order.
And so for me, when things aren't going right, the first thing I turn to, especially if I think that it should be, you know, the roar or the croaking should well and truly have taken off, is what I would call like location calling, I guess. So in terms of, it's something we didn't talk about in the Fallow podcast, potentially because I can't actually croak. Ayden can croak and has done it before. And Nick, as you'll see in the Fallow Frenzy series, like he can croak and had bucks croaking back at him and stuff, which is an awesome tool. I wish I could do it. I roar like a maniac for red deer and stuff, to the point that I think I've said before, like people have asked me, like, maybe, like, do you think you're roaring too much? And I guess I try and, like I said, like I'm not really aggressively roaring, and I'm generally like quite far away from stuff when I'm roaring. But yeah, I don't think you can like call too much personally. just in like a general setting. Like obviously if you're moving in or something, then that's very different. And we've discussed this before in the Red Deer podcast, but in terms of just doing like a location croak or roar, you're just sort of sounding off and just saying, hey, I'm over here, guys, like, like what's everyone doing sort of thing. And it might just be enough. Like I often use the phrase at first light, it's like, if nothing's calling, like let's get the party started. So like you really just, like normally you'll be quite high up on a ridge top for other tactics and stuff like glassing as well when it's quiet. But yeah, you're getting quite high up. If you're croaking in terms of for a buck, like normally I would actually rather be on a scrape because it's got two benefits. So the first thing is you're just sending that sort of audio out to the wider mountains, I guess, and hopefully a buck starts croaking to say, like, piss off, I'm over here, you stay over there, mate, or I'll bash you, or whatever, which is like the first benefit. But secondly, like bucks will come in, especially in that early rut period, like silent to your location or you. So being on a scrape and like setting up as if you're like rattling, for example, having an arrow on the string, doing all those processes and stuff. Like I've certainly been with people that have croaked and then had bucks of all different maturity levels come in silent. And the first thing they do is they're expecting that buck to be on the scrape. And so they come to the scrape to check it out, which if you're set up, 20 meters off it and ready to go, like that's a prime shooting opportunity with something coming to you. And so, you've gone from suddenly having these mornings or whatever, having like 0 encounters, nothing making noise, and then a buck comes to you and hopefully you can get it done. So I find, definitely like you sort of trying to start the party with your own vocalizations is like definitely one of the ones for when it is quiet. Another one mainly with red deer that I've done this for, and actually elk in the US, is I stole this from a podcast, an elk podcast ages ago, and I've sort of implemented it into my hunting, but is one of the blocks that I've hunted for red deer. Like it's a massive property, but it's super, super low density. Like we're talking about, a couple of red deer on like 50,000 acres, just a sort of thing. And so with that, like they're so sporadic and they move around so much and they call so little that, if you hear roars in the day, like it's incredible. But the thing is, generally speaking, like these animals are so much more active during the night that, since we've spoken about, for those cooler temperatures, lower pressure, like it's just everything's, nicer about it. And so I've actually done it with reds, particularly where I've got up for multiple days in a row at midnight and like either walk the roads or drove the roads in the dark, and I'd like drive somewhere with my lights off, park the car, hopefully like, fairly high up a ridge. I'd sit there for probably 15, 20 minutes. If nothing roared, then I'd do a couple of roars, just like general stuff. And then, if you get a roar back, you're like, oh, this is sick. Like there's a red deer here sort of thing. But yeah, it just helps like maybe for localizing stuff. And if you could like, especially if you've got a block and it's not quite started yet, you can do this stuff and try and, I guess, start the party even earlier. And then, you've at least got like a heading in the morning for where you're like going to be hunting and stuff. And there's at least animals there. Where, there's plenty of places with really low, like this is more probably for low density sort of situations, but yeah, definitely like spending the time between like midnight and 3 a.m. I've certainly had some good responses to calling both to elk and red deer, and just finding these little pockets where, in the daytime they might not respond. And equally, you just never knew they existed because you can cover country a lot easier at night, like in a vehicle or whatever. And just raw, it's a lot quieter too, so you can just project your volume a lot more. The chance that it actually responds a lot higher, and it's just a little cool trick that I can't remember the podcast I got off, but it's definitely paid dividends as a tactic for me.
I think importantly here, one of the things that I really like to implement with a lot of my like mountain hunting in particular, which is where I'm typically doing like this fallow deer hunting and red deer raw hunts as well, is like get up quite high early in the morning, because for whatever reason, like on sunrise, there is this lull as the sun pops up where animals will often get quiet. But if you've been able to hear them early morning, and then as the sun pops up and you get that grey light, be able to locate like, oh yeah, that is a good fallow buck or that is a good red stag. Like you might only need them to call once or twice during the daylight hours. But that's where that importance of being up way before first light and hearing them and being able to get in closer and closer and closer, acknowledging like that the wind's obviously going to have an impact in this point. Like, yes, they can't see you, but once you get to a certain point, the wind's going to be your biggest enemy. And just preparing that way. Like that's why personally I like to get as close as I can if there's a buck croaking before first light, knowing that as soon as that sun comes up, there is a fair chance that it's going to quieten his activity just naturally, just because they do become more secretive and like recluse and try and get back up to those areas, especially when you're talking about like a big red stag. But what I like to do if I'm not hearing croaks or if I'm trying to like explore a bit of a ridge line is actually get up quite high, acknowledging that for me, I think the sound just comes and hits you a bit better when you're up higher out of those real deep, dark like timbered gullies. And two, for the better, like added benefits of glassing. So knowing as well that, you know, unless you're on an animal for that first hour or so of daylight, as soon as the sun starts hitting the valley, the thermals are going to, you know, be coming up the hill and sometimes being above animals. And especially in the case of reds where they're moving, it might not be advantageous to necessarily like drop in on them straight away at first light unless you can get in on them quite quickly and have the thermals quite nice. Whereas if they're going to be, you know, moving up and feeding up to an area and then you can plan out where they are, potentially even as they're starting to bed down and slow down and mill around a certain particular spot, you can then use your elevation and the wind and the thermals going up the hill by now, like mid-morning, to drop in on them. But I just think, you know, with glassing, it's essential to be not walking up the hill on first light, but in a position where you've hopefully heard croaks and stuff. If you haven't, and it is a slow rut or raw and there's no vocalizations, you're in the position before light to maybe even try letting out a few of these vocalizations, as James alluded to. But then as a sort of like not a last resort, like, but just treating it like a normal sort of hunt, you know, treat it as it's the other 11 months outside the rut. Or the raw, where, you know, these animals do have to feed, they do have to move, they do transition from feeding to bedding areas and so forth and drinking and whatnot. So just sitting there for the first couple of hours and putting eyes on the mountain or eyes on the hill is always going to be beneficial, and making sure that, yeah, you're not walking up the hill between 6 a.m. when it's first sunlight till 7 a.m. You're already up there glassing, because then as soon as you see something, you can either bail off the mountain or, you know, make a note, especially if you've got days up your sleeve, like, okay, there's a buck that's not on his scrape, which might suggest that he's not, you know, it's not the rut yet. If he's not on his scrape croaking, there's a fair chance it's not peak rut, it might be pre-rut. But if he's walks in the same corner of the field every day and heads up to a certain gully where he beds down, like, you know that, you know, in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days, that might be where he suddenly isn't feeding as much, and that's where the does are going to be going back to his scrape, like that he might occupy in that bedding area or whatever. So there's just so much like knowledge and intel to be good, like taken from good glassing strategies.
Oh, it's one of these tools where like good glass, even not good glass, but just putting the time into it. Like, I don't know, I think we glass a lot, like Ayden and I, probably from a chittle deer sort of background, I guess, a lot of that focus where we've probably developed a lot of our hunt strategies around that. But like, there's so many people that I know that I go hunting with, even in the mountains and stuff, like they just really don't glass much at all. And for me, I know like personally, even with elk and everything, like if things aren't making noise, like other than like trying to call, and there's a few other little tactics and stuff, but using your glass to find game is like pivotal to, you know, finding game really. Like I can't think of how many times, like even during the peak rut and stuff, like peak rut on most places mean you get an hour or two of vocalization in the morning and maybe an hour in the arvo. But like there's still, you know, that takes you from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. really, where there's not much vocalization unless there's like a big day and hinds or doe in heat and stuff like that. And for me, that time is generally filled in on the mountain. Like it doesn't mean you go back to camp because they stop calling. Like you're not going to shoot them there. And so for me, like I can't, like I'll just sit up on the side of a hill, especially if there's like a good vantage point, and just glass the other hill like my life depends on it. And I can't tell you how many like magnificent red stags I've seen walking around on a ridge at like 11 o'clock in the afternoon. Like some of them, you know, you never catch up with. Some of them I had great encounters with. Some of them, you know, fallow deer and stuff, like, yeah, we've got in and actually got it done on. So, I mean, like, it's one of these things that it's like, if you can't shoot them in camp. So, I mean, like, just because they've gone quiet doesn't mean they just disappear and, you know, dive into wombat holes. Like, they're still there. And so really glassing, like, is the way to find them, because, like, yeah, you can cover so much country, like, especially in these beautiful mountains that we've got around here. Like, you know, it's obviously harder on the flats, but like in those mountains, like you save your legs, you know, sit there on you know, a good glassing knob where you can see like great views and just cover country, because it's incredible how many bucks, does, like, you know, even boars and stuff. Like it's incredible what you can see. And it may not mean like, you know, sometimes you see a red stag from miles away and it may sort of not register or generate anything, but like sometimes it's like I've been seen red stags and hinds get pushed and then they're ages away, but then the next morning you're where you saw them and all of a sudden they're roaring and carrying on and you've got this incredible opportunity that you didn't even know there was reds there or that they use that gully, but it got created from you putting in the time and glassing.
I think you have to also mention here with glassing that it's just a way of assessing what's around without physically moving or putting too much scent on the mountain too, which as we, go on further, and especially in a lot of our hunts, we're considering like how many times have we bumped an animal, how many times have we scared that mobberoos that now know to look down the hill from a certain approach or up the hill from a certain approach, because that's the way the wind like allows you to come in. So you've got to think that, that's one thing with hunting pressure during the rut is like you might get one chance for 30 days of hunting the rut on one buck. And fortunately, sometimes with the rut and being a bit silly and amped up, these bucks give you a second and third and fourth chances. But often the case, as we've explored, the does and the hinds don't. So that's where like if you are sitting in the mountain and you've got, 360 degree views ideally of the mountainside around you, and like you can just sit there all day and pick it apart, that might be so much better than just walking a ridge and hoping that you're sort of bumping onto something, because it's like, let's face it, it's easier to sit there on a gully and see movement in the open a lot of the time, or something move through like a little patch, and especially if there's like 2 or 3 of you sitting up there on a gully and you can sort of quietly talk and you keep it interesting and stuff. Whereas if you're dialed in and spot and stalking essentially for an animal that you don't even know, you're just anticipating is on the ridge line in front of you, it's incredibly hard to like keep it dialed and take one step and then glass and one step and glass and one step and glass. And that's actually what's required, because you see so commonly people go, especially when it is quiet and especially when it is harder hunting and they're not croaking and telling you exactly where they are, that hunters go and try and make it happen, but they're not like completely invested in it. It's almost like they're like, oh, I'm just out here because I know like it's the rut and I should be doing, hunting and stuff like that. And sometimes just going, okay, they're not making noise, I'm going to be the least intrusive as possible and just try and get a little bit of intel for when they are making noise. But it also comes back to like, if a fallow buck croaks once and you can go, okay, he's on that hillside, move 300 meters so that now you can see directly into every little shadow and gap on that hillside, get your spotting scope out, and he might not have to croak for the whole rest of that day. And if you can identify, oh shit, okay, yep, he's a light coloured mennel buck and he's sitting under that big gum tree, and you sit there on your mapping software and go, yep, I'm going to roughly mark him in there at that elevation, blah, blah, blah. Like that hill face is, 1,000 meters in elevation. He's 2/3 of the way up. So he's at around 660 meters, blah, blah, blah. Know what that wind is doing. The next morning, you can be on that hill face coming in from, down, up, level with him, whatever, and hopefully hearing him croak in the morning, because you might have missed that opportunity just by experiencing like a new patch of turf. But by sitting there at, from 7 a.m. till, 11 potentially in the morning, he might not have made a single sound, but you've been able to watch him bed down on a scrape or watch some does through that you never even saw in the morning leave the field or the pasture or whatever, trickle up through that tree line and just bed 100 meters below his scrape. So, if they're not on his scrape, they're probably not ready to breed. But in the coming days, you can monitor that whole situation from the other side of the world, basically, other side of the gully, not give him any pressure, no stress. And then as soon as the rut does start up, or as soon as they do start making noise, or if you go, oh, I've only got 2 days of hunting left, it's not ideal, they're being quiet, but I've got to make a stalk opportunity. You've just got so much more intel to actually, have an effective stalk and try and get it done on these animals.
Whether you're making your way up a scree cliff or hiking a distant trail, you want to be confident in the boots that you wear. And for Ayden and I, that means lower. We've been running the Lower Ranger GTX 3s for over 5 years now. So we've teamed up with Lower to get 10% off your next order by using the code TWINELEMENTS10. That is TWINELEMENTS, 10 the number, at checkout to get 10% off your next order. Ayden touched on it a little bit, but I the first hour or two of light, either I do a combination of, and it does take quite a lot of sort of patience is probably the way of describing it. But I typically will walk quite slowly, that 3/4, 2/3 of the way up a ridge on the prominent game trail that most of the animals are walking on, and I'll be glassing across the ridge, and that's where like every so often I'll sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and glass across the ridge. But I generally speaking, like I sort of like covering a little bit of country at that time in the morning. I find that you just pop up onto things, especially because you're almost allowing the animals to be transitioning up to their bedding area or whatever and like come onto you. And because you're walking on a game trail, like I can't think of how many times you just like come over eyes, you're like, holy shit, that's a great boar at 30 meters, or holy shit, that's a fox like walking to me, or, red deer, fallow deer, anything just pops up in front of you.
Especially when there's topographical folds in the country and you're on one big hill face, but there is a slight depression or a little blackberry choked like gully. And then as you go down through it, you weave through and you're like, oh, this game trail, because no animal wants to take the hard path. They want to go on the path of least resistance. So if there's a massive choked blackberry gully, they're all going to walk through it at certain points. And like you walk through it and go, oh, there's actually a wallow in this little soak. Or there's actually this, and you pop through it and you're like, oh shit, there's no way I would have seen that boar just copying a little bit of sun at first light, eating some blackberries. And that's where like sometimes from sitting there, like it is, you've done all the hard work, got all the elevation, got up early, you're sitting there on the ridge, but don't forget to move too, because your perspective in point A on the ridge is so different to even if you just drop down in elevation 20 meters. It opens up a whole complete different side of the valley. Or if you roll around the hill 50 meters or 100 meters, and that's what I was explaining to earlier. I think I used the example of, going to slip away to go to the toilet, and you hear a buck croaking 100 meters away from where you've been sitting for 2 or 3 hours. And we've all done it, but the same can be said of like you wrap around 50 meters and you're like, oh shit, there's a mob of 10 hinds there. And by identifying like, okay, there's a mob of hinds there, I'm anticipating that it's coming up to the red deer raw. A stag is going to come and possess those hinds. Like that's his one mission. So if you haven't found the stag yet, but you've found the hinds, you're halfway to locating him. And then again, if you know where those hinds are, you don't put any pressure on them, they're going to be doing the same thing. It's not until a stag sort of generally comes in on them and changes their habits, or the rutting activity of the raw changes their habits, or hunting pressure. A lot of the hinds will sort of do the same things. They do move around more than fallow deer, but they're not waking up each morning going, oh yeah, I'm going out to this postcode. Oh, I'm going out to this postcode. I'm going out to this postcode. They're going to use the same habits and things that they've been doing for months, especially if it's like a little nursery that's quiet on a nice little pasture or something like that. And then they can just slip away to a nice little retreat and bed down for the day.
That hunt tactic of like moving quite slowly, high up on a ridge is pretty much how we hunt all year round, to be honest. But it's like, it's this combination of like, you're walking so slowly that you're letting stuff come to you, but you're also like glassing everywhere, including the opposite ridge. And if you get like a good opportunity to see across the face, then you're parking up, 5-10 minutes. Just sit there, put your knees up so you can use that for glass and get really steady and start glassing up the hill. And, it's incredible to how, like, even because you're moving so slowly, how many things you actually hear. So it could be like a little, like, you hear a buck like 100 meters away rubbing a tree or something, or you hear a twig snap and you're like, what is that? And then you like look down and it is a boar, or it is, a stag silently behind a hind coming through like 50 or 60 meters below you that hasn't made a call all morning. You've been up on the hill since, 5 a.m. when it gets light at 6, roaring and stuff like that. But he's been sitting there 200 meters off you being like, I'm not going to make a single noise, and then all of a sudden he comes through because he's pushing the hind, and then that's the opportunity. And so like, it's really like, I don't really like personally just sitting in one spot, because I find like even just, we're talking about covering maybe like a kilometre or a kilometre and a half of hill face in a morning, which, you could walk that so far. Like you walk in 20 minutes if you wanted to, but it's like really slowing it down. And like I said, you're almost anticipating that the animals are going to be coming to you or filtering past you and stuff. You are on a game trail, like Ayden said. And so like things come to you or you see things all the time, but it's so much better than I find just sort of sitting in one spot, because you just get more opportunities doing that.
The thing too, like this is what I think separates like a hunter from a good hunter, that where you find that like, there's 10% of the people shooting a lot of the animals, is because there's a difference between like meticulously walking, as James was alluding to, and following a game trail. Anyone can walk on a trail, lift their binos up when they go, oh, that stump looks like a deer. Is it a deer? Whereas if you take a step and literally glass 180 degrees, every single sapling, you're racking your focus. And we're going to do a podcast on how to actually glass effectively and like what to be looking for and what to be doing and stuff. Like scrolling your eyes, especially if you're sitting there on a mountain face looking at the other side, like look through your objectives and like do little like graphs. Like you're essentially going from row A down a row, back from the right-hand side to row, like to the left, down a row, and you just keep doing that. And you're doing that subconsciously, like your eyes, like you watch James glassing through his binoculars and his eyes are darting around erratically. And it's because he's looking at every little contrast, every little shape, every little, is that branch a stick? Is that an antler? Is that a leaf or is that an ear? Like you're not looking at, there's a slight change in contrast on that hill. It has to be a boar because it's black. It's like, no, that's a log. What you want to be looking for is like the shapes and the sort of tones and things like that. And the more you like start looking at the actual terrain and go, and instead of looking for an animal, go, this game trail I'm walking on has fresh tracks, or there's some scat there, and it might not be on the game trail. You might notice a tiny little rub that's 10 meters away, and then you change your trajectory and you now find a fresh game trail that's going slight different trajectory off, and then you look up and you're like, it's now 9 o'clock in the morning. That looks like a good shaded little bedding area on the top third of that gully. And you glass in there and you're like, holy crap, there's a brow tine there. Whereas if you were looking for a deer and weren't paying attention to the rubs, to the sign, to the birds calling, to the whatever it may be, like the amount of times you hear like potentially hunting sambar deer, I've had this a lot where this is like sambar deer hunting to a T. There's no real vocalizations. They do with like certainly vocalize, which as you hunt, the more you'll understand. But for most people, they're like the most secretive deer. But this is like, that's why I think we do so well, regardless of if animals are calling or not, whether it's like elk rutting in America, red deer stag roaring here, pigs fighting during the roar, their rut and stuff like that. Like we don't necessarily need animals to be calling because we know their nature. We know how to traverse over a hill quietly. We know what elevation we should be at. We know how to read sign. We know how to read the wind and just make ourselves suitable because like, especially if you're in areas that are like, animal rich, something's just going to walk onto you. And it's like, you don't have to be the best hunter. You just have to be more aware and observant and be ready to capitalize on that experience. Because sometimes it is that, you peer over a ridge and if you take one extra step, you're skylined. Whereas if you take half a step and glass and be diligent and sort of, consistent in the way you're glassing, taking one step is a lot less movement than taking 3 steps and then glassing. So that's the biggest thing is like the actual mannerisms that you're doing this. Because like I have people saying, yeah, I do that. I walk a few steps in glass and I walk a few steps in glass. And I'm like, I know that sounds like what you're doing is the same as what we're doing, but it's like every time I raise my binos, I'm looking through them thinking there's an animal here, I need to find it. Or every time I look at the mountain, I'm thinking there is something on this mountain that I need to read and find and listen to that is going to give me the edge that in the next X amount of seconds, it's going to put the edge in my favor and I'm going to shoot something. Like you can't be doing this if you don't think there's something in front of you. Like you have to treat, and that's why the mental focus and diligence and just discipline to do this, especially when it is all day, is like extreme. And that's why like we see hunting in general as like a job, as a sport, as a dedication, a pursuit, whatever you want to call it. But it's like, we're not there to muck around. We're not there to like, we'll give it a crack and then we'll head back to camp. It's like, we're doing it with a very clear goal of what it takes to get it done. And that's why I think after you do it and you spend so much time in the bush as we have, like you pay so much like respect to that little rub or to that track or to that fresh bit of scat because it tells you so much more about the whole situation that you're in.
And I just want to bring back full fold, I guess, back onto what we were talking about. So like when we were talking about like walking up these upper thirds of the ridge and stuff, like we're doing that in a very specific area following the sign. Like we're creeping along those game trails because like of the whole, 1,000, 10,000, 100,000 acres of access that we've got, we think that this is where the game is. Like we're not just like, after days and days and days of not being able to find stuff, you might go and walk random country that looks really good, but we're walking this game trail on this ridge for this morning or this afternoon for a very, very specific reason. And another thing that I forgot to mention with the location, croaking and roaring and stuff like that, this is mainly around the red deer, but generally speaking, like when they're not roaring and stuff and you do a roar, like a location roar and you get a response, like 9 times out of 10, it also is just going to be like quite a low energy, not super aggressive roar. Like, and that comes back to the timing and tone that we sort of spoke about the other day. And so do not like go out there and then just like roar over the top of that stag, because like he's like, you're sort of lucky to even like, unless he just comes out with this ridiculous guttural roar because he's probably got hinds and he's saying piss off and stuff. But like he's probably just saying, like, you're probably too close to him or whatever, or he's just like feeling obliged to reply to you, if that makes sense. So like, don't just come in and like smother him with this like super aggressive roar before the fire's even started. Like, you sort of got to do like a little bit of that song and dance. And that's obviously something that we covered in the previous podcast, but like, yeah, just make sure that you vocalize back accordingly to him. Like, don't smother that fire before it started.
Yeah, you've got to certainly read the room there. And that's where, like, if you have been hunting and just traversing the ridge for the whole morning and it's now 8:30 and just suddenly a buck sparks up and goes, and, you know, hopefully I haven't blown the speakers out there, but you hear 5 croaks and then it just sort of goes quiet. There's no point like getting your rattles out or starting to croak and be like, yeah, I'm going to call this guy in and doe call. It's like, all he's done is give you a rough location now. And again, he could be moving, but if you just keep the wind right, which is the most essential thing in these instances, and now you've got a bit of a bead, like, you know, hopefully you follow the right game trail down to that area because it's all going to interlink. And then you start seeing, like, if I start seeing roos in a gully, I'm like, okay, I'm in the right spot, because the amount of times that roos bed and sort of inhabit right near where that big boar's living or right where that fallow buck's living is like ridiculous. It's like, if you guys have started to watch our Fallow Frenzy series on YouTube, it's nearly every single time we see a big fallow buck and he's holding his does in a particular gully, it's like the big eastern grey kangaroos are right there. And it's because it's either like out of the wind, it's a good visual spot for them to you know, see what's coming around them. They can hear all these things. They've also got good feed nearby. It's a good bedding area. It's got like a nice open ridge top where they can have, you know, their scrapes and things. Like, there's so many factors that go into it. It's not by chance that you just see roos and deers next to each other. It's not because they particularly love each other, but they do look out for each other. Like, if you scare one roo, it signals to every single thing on that ridge that there's something coming. And it's the same as like the amount of times I've heard, I think my dad actually spoke to it in our episode 2, Origins, where the more you're hunting and you just read animal behavior, like the amount of times I've heard a bird do an abnormal call, and particularly like the little willy wagtails or the wrens or the, you know, these sort of finches and things do certain calls, and you're like, I haven't heard that all morning. And then you just sit there and look in that blackberry thicket for a little bit longer and a boar walks out and you're like, if I took 3 steps, I would have just either winded him, like gone past the point where the wind was traveling to that, or completely missed it and walked around him and not seen him for the day. But it's just, again, like, being receptive to what's going on around you is super, super valuable. And that's where, like, you see the roos, don't just go, oh shit, there are roos on the mountain. How am I going to scare them? Do you know what I mean? Look at them and go, okay, what are the roos doing? Are they feeding quite contently and just not even looking up? Or are they, you know, feeding contently, 5 of them, but all the roos up in the top corner there are looking into the bush? Like, why are they looking into the bush? There's either a fox, there's either a bird, there's either an echidna or a wombat, or potentially there's some bucks or a deer or whatever coming out of that top corner. Like, there's so much to tell and pick up from, especially the way animals that they position their ears and their body when they're feeding and bedding and all these types of things. It really is like so many visual cues. Bringing target precision to hunting camp, Option Archery makes specialist gear. Their quiverizer is one of our favourite bits of kit. This stabilizer combined arrow quiver is extremely unique, cutting weight with its clever 2-in-1 design. The Option sights are versatile in this regard also, offering both a single or multi-pin sight housing within the same sight. Shop their products today.
Another good strategy at this time when things just aren't going according to plan, this is obviously mainly for bucks rather than stags, is rattling. So just sort of, I guess, adding on to that, slowly walking and stuff. Like, if you come across like a really good scrape that looks really active, there's rubs all around it, you know, freshly turned up dirt, like clearly there's a buck or probably multiple bucks using it. And so just because they're not vocalizing, like, doesn't mean that, you know, you can't call something into it. And that's where I find, and we discussed similarly in podcasts, but rattling sort of in that early rut period is actually a really, really good tool, because it's one of these non-vocal cues that you draw animals towards you. So like, if they're not responding to croaks and roars, it's another little option, another little tip to have up your sleeve that may just get a buck to come into you. Like, we've obviously spoken about setup, so I'm not going to harp on too much about that, but make sure you are ready and expecting that a buck is going to come in, because, you know, it's something that especially that pre-rut period or early period that we're talking about now, where things are sort of quiet, like, croaking is like that golden strategy where you get things to come in. So make sure you're ready. Same thing if you see areas of like really good rub lines and stuff like that, like for bucks and whatnot. Like, yeah, you can try rattling in there, because there are like the bucks are there, they're traveling around. That's the frustrating part. You're seeing all this sign and stuff, but you're just not hearing the vocalizations. And so, if you can draw their location, draw them into your location with a cue that they're sort of expecting to be here, well, it could mean that you turn up trumps and get that opportunity you're looking for.
I've found countless times as well, even if you're not particularly like doing these rattles, and that is a great effective mechanism to use, like especially early rudder if they're not making noise, just to call something into your location. One thing I'll add that you didn't say just there is if you find urine in a buck scrape, it's like he's been there very recently and actively, being territorial over that scrape. It could be a little buck. Every buck pisses, so it could be a little buck, but it also could be that big buck. Just take the time, do things right, have a rattle. But another thing that I want to discuss is like, if you know where topographically and like so speaking to the elevation of a ridge, majority of the bucks having their scrapes, even if it's the most quiet, rut, and you haven't heard a single buck, and it's like what you think should be peak prime time, like where the does are, I would just be going through and hunting these scrapes. Like the amount of times I've found really good bucks just bedded on a scrape, and they might not be vocalizing, but they're just on their scrapes. Like they know that, again, speaking to the biology and the fact that the does are selective of the bucks, they don't want to just go and walk off and bed down in the bush randomly. Like they've put so much time and effort into these scrapes that, if they bed on the scrapes, eventually on day 7, a doe is going to come to their scrape to be bred. And that's where once they do start doing that and the does do start coming into estrus and all these environmental factors line up, as we said, like the rut should pick up. But in the times when it is quiet, like just hunting those rut and scrape lines is really, really effective. And I think you'll find that you quite rarely get like one valley or ridge where like all the scrape lines are at a certain height and then you walk 100 meters lower and they're all still down there. Like it really is quite soil dependent, quite elevation dependent in a lot of these instances, because you go too high up, and especially what I've found, like you go higher up and there's more rock and open exposed faces, and the bucks, and the does don't necessarily want to be up there because it is too rocky, it's too open, it's too windy. That's more goat country. So you come down slightly, and that's where, the moisture in the ground is just enough where they can dig their scrapes. There's still trees, and it's not, alpine country, obviously, that they can, have their scrape and their preach on an overhanging branch. Whereas if you go too far down, it just becomes too thick, too bushy. There's too much blackberries, thickets, all this type of stuff. And they don't want to be courting does and building scrapes in amongst all that type of crap. So there is a very particular belt on the ridgeline or on the valley or the gully system, whatever you wanted to call it, on the mountain, where bucks are going to have scrapes. And I think if you stick to those areas, it's going to be, more beneficial for you. And that's where like there's a saying that goes like, hunt the country that is like able to be hunted. Because like I've heard it be said actually on the Meat Eater podcast, it's like, I don't know if all the mule deer are on this type of country, or if it's just because I can actually physically see into this type of country that I'm seeing mule deer. But there's no point hunting like dogwood that's 15 meters tall or 10 meters tall and you physically can't walk through it. You can't see into it, because every single deer on your property could be there, but there's no way you're going to shoot it. There's no way you're going to see it. There's no way you're going to anything with it. Whereas if you go and you want to try and find that junction between thick and light open country, because you might, again, all the deer might be in the open country. And if you're a bow hunter, you're not going to shoot them. You need some sort of vertical cover to be able to, 1, draw the bow, but 2, get into range. So you're sort of almost like being selective and hunting the country that's like half likely. But again, like you want to be hunting that country that's likely, but then finding the rubs and finding the scat and finding all this stuff. So there's just piecing it all together. There's so many lessons to be like combining and putting towards obviously having the right scene in front of you to find these bucks and stags.
Another thing that I've noticed with mainly to do with the red deer now, but with if temperature, if you think temperature is the factor that's causing the reduced rutting activity and vocalization, that particularly with red deer, I've found them to be more probably like heat susceptible, I guess. And so on those really hot days, finding like western facing like slopes or really sort of dark gully systems, often sadly quite thick gully systems and stuff can be quite a handy tool because when it is obviously really hot, like they don't want to be in that direct light. And so they will sort of try and find the better shaded gully systems. And so, yeah, generally speaking, those like western facing slopes can be a really good place to look. So, leading then on from the glassing, it may be you setting up on an eastern facing slope and trying to look into these areas. And you might find a couple of stags or hinds up bedded or, moving around in the thick timber, like where they can still get up and feed and stuff, because normally the feed in these gullies are really good too. And to be honest, red deer like sort of bedding on a bit of a bench. Like they don't like just sort of like everything really likes bending on like a bit of a flat spot and stuff. And that's why you'll see these little beds and stuff like that. But red deer, especially being like bigger animals, like they want to have like a bit of a flat spot. So if you think that you've got, a group of reds, maybe 6 or so hinds and a stag, like they do need a little bit of a bench. And so, yeah, even if you do look on topo maps or something like that and can see that there is a bit of a flat spot on a ridge, it's definitely something that you want to be peering into in that middle of the day and try and see them moving around in there bedded or, moving around feeding, or bedded.
I think another thing in terms of like gaining intel and just working on previous knowledge and things like that is going to be like the use of trail cameras. So just being able to put them out, especially with red deer, as we said in the previous episodes of the podcast, they are a species of deer that love water. You'll see the hinds, fawns, all that type of stuff playing in water, drinking in dams over the summer months. The red stags will obviously then move into the area and start wallowing in some of these spots. So again, like if it's a typically warm and adverse, like compared to, we obviously want the cool rut and things like that, or raw. But if it is particularly warm, it's going to increase the odds that a red stag is going to go and wallow. Like they do enjoy that, similar to like a wild boar. They'll go and wallow and cool themselves down, spread their scent and stuff like that. So it could be a strategy for, they're not roaring, but they might be wallowing more. That incidence of roaring could go up like a couple of %, which again, if you're sticking it out there, particularly during the hottest part of the day, he might bed his girls and then slip over and have a bit of a hot tub in the wallow. But the same thing goes for, I can't tell you the amount of times that we've had trail cameras on scrapes, and even though you think it's a quiet rut, we've gone and checked those cameras and there's been a buck there the whole night on his scrape, and you can see in the photos that he's calling. So it's just they're calling at different times. But that, if you saw that, if I saw, for example, a buck, an hour before first light or an hour just after dark calling, what I might do is get to that scrape on first light and be ready to go with the wind in my face. Even if he's not on there, I might rattle and hope that I can attract him from a nearby area onto that scrape. I might also, sit there and just play the long game in the afternoons, or I might also use that as intel to say, okay, he's only here an hour before first light and then he goes away somewhere, and he's often probably going to go away to where the does are or the thick bush is, but he's on this hill face. So then again, that would reinforce me to go about my slow little tips and tactics of, stalking these gully systems and anticipate that there's a deer over the next little ridge.
Yeah, trial cameras is a huge asset and tool, especially when it is quiet, just like Ayden said, on scrapes and stuff like that, or water courses for red deer and stuff, just to see what is moving through and just, see if you're in the right area. Like if you've got stuff on water courses and you think there should be red deer there because you've had previous experience, and then you check all the trial cameras one day and you've got one hind, well, I'd probably be ripping those cameras out and moving somewhere else on the property if you can, or going to a different property or something like that. Same with fallow bucks. Like, like Ayden said, it could mean that you check a scrape and you're like, oh, there's nothing happening and stuff. And there's 5 bucks that have been there in the last 2 days. And you're like, holy shit, I'm just missing these deer. And that's where you might do a sit off that scrape if things are quiet, or if, you check it and there's nothing. It's like, okay, well, good. You're getting all this like free intel. Like, it's a resource that doesn't sleep. I mean, unless the batteries run out, but, you can try and avoid that. It's a resource that's there on the mountain 24/7. So try and use it as much as you can. It's one of these things that people forget about, almost when we're in the rut sort of thing. Like I feel like it's used really well pre-rut, but it also just tells you, like, if you check the camera and you're trying to generally go for one of these mature big bucks or big stags and something, and you're not seeing it on that camera, well, you're probably not going to put that much time into that area, like especially if it's on like a main scrape or if it's on like a main wallow or a main something. Like, it just gives you so much more intel and means that you can like invest your time more wisely in that area to hopefully get the results you want, even if it's making noise or if they're not.
OzCaf Energy helps you power your passion, designed to be convenient, discreet and portable with rapid energy absorption. These caffeine pouches are centered around adventure. With added benefits such as 0 calories and 0 sugar, what's not to love? Use code TWINELEMENTS for 10% off your next order. I think it's definitely worth talking now to what I like to call mental toughness and just a hunter's sort of perception as to what's going on. I'll be honest now, like we've all done it. We've all obviously put in with work, put in with the partner and the spouse, family, friends that ditched Easter, ditched whatever holidays and public weekends there are off to go out in the bush and hunt. And we've organised this precious time slot to go away hunting. And then as soon as the hunting's tough or things have, got slightly adverse, we say, oh, the weather looks warm the next couple of days. I haven't heard a croak over the last 3 days. I'm maybe running a little bit low on food. I'm a little bit tired because I haven't maybe put in the prior preparations and stuff. I'm not going to lie, like your mind is your worst enemy at times. It's not, any of these other factors that are going on. It's purely like this grit and determination factor. And sometimes you need to just sit there and say, stop being a little bitch. And that is quite frankly, like it sounds rude and whatnot, but you've done so much often to sacrifice and get this time off in this important part of the year for us. Like we all identify it. Like my calendar is set from the previous year. Like I'm getting March, April, as much time as I can off. It's nearly to me more important than my own birthday. It definitely is. I'd celebrate the Rut Raw more than I'd celebrate my own birthday. Like, yeah, who am I kidding? That's 100% true. But what I'm trying to say is if you've spent, all this time and effort getting ready for the Rut and Raw, and then you're so fickle that you can let, a few slow, quiet days go, by, or maybe you've actually stuffed up on a red stag or you stuffed up on a fallow buck, that should give you more confidence that, you're so close to making it happen. And that's where it's really, really important that, especially if you're alone, that you just have like a minute, 30 minutes to just check yourself and say, it's okay that I'm feeling this feeling of wanting to go home early. Like we all get it, especially when you got partners, kids, and you get that sort of, a bit of like, not grief, but it's like you feel a bit guilty as to like, oh, I'm out here having a shit rut and nothing's really going my way. I'm wasting 3 or 4 days out of my precious schedule and I could be at home doing that or fixing the chicken coop or spending time with my kids or at that Easter party. But you've already made that decision. You've already done it. So my biggest thing is have the mental toughness and be real with yourself that you've set out this time, just see it through. And that doesn't mean sitting in camp during lunchtime. Like if you've only got 4 days to hunt the rut, hunt every second hour of that, like that trip. Don't go back. And like if for you, it depends obviously what sort of fanatic level you are with hunting. Like if hunting for you is the first couple of hours of the morning and the last couple of hours of the day and you want to have beers with your mates in camp, then that's completely fine. But get up before the first light. Don't get up on the mountain late if you're only going to put in 2 hours in the morning. Do you know what I mean? Like do everything that you can to have the best couple of hours of first light, and then you go back, enjoy it, have a few beers with your mates, and hopefully you are successful. Because my biggest thing, if you can take it away from this, is just that, sticking to the plan is crucial. If you say you're going to have 4 days, see it through. You'll feel so much better for it. Because I know the regret that comes with, you wait 12 months to go and hunt the rut, and then things aren't going your way, and you quit on it. And you go home early, and as soon as you jump in the car and shut the gate behind you and say goodbye to the property owner or whatever, and you start driving home, like I've had it where your partner's like, oh, you coming home already? And you're just like, fuck, like what? No, I'm not. I'm just checking in. I'm going back. And for me, I've genuinely had that as a feeling, particularly when I was like hunting sand deer and stuff or big chittle trips where, it's definitely a thing. But particularly in this period when it is such a peak in activity, you really do want to be hunting it as much as you can, because for the next 11 months, you're just going to be reminded of it as to the fact that you sort of quit and did leave the bush early.
Yeah, I think like digging in there in these hard times is definitely what defines like great hunters as well. Like that persistence to just keep putting it out on the mountain, like even when you're not getting the results. Because often, like I said, like if the biggest factor is that it's just too early, then like just sticking around that extra day, like how often do you leave or whatever? And you're like, oh, I'll just go home for a couple of days and get some jobs done or whatever. And then, your mate message and be like, oh, we had the best morning on the reds this morning. And you're just like, I'm an absolute idiot. And then you're back there. And then generally speaking, it kicks off and like you do have that really good raw. But I mean, like using the tips and tactics, hopefully that we've just described to you, like that should really like give you some more opportunities than what you would have had. And hopefully it does mean that even if it is quiet and you're not sort of getting the results, that you can turn it around and start having some opportunities. But I really did like what Ayden said about just taking that minute sometimes to just be like, okay, like, because I think we get, especially after a couple of days, like if you are putting in the work, like you're in a calorie deficit, you're in a sleep deficit, you know, like you're struggling and stuff. Like, so taking a minute and being like, okay, like I'm going to do this thought process of like, why am I not seeing or getting the results that I'm wanting, and be like really systematic about it and be like, okay, like firstly, is their game here? You know, pretty black and white. Like, do I think they're here? Okay, yes, I've got trial cameras. I know they're here, blah, blah, blah. I've had previous experiences here, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, what factor is it then that is determining, like, is it temperature? Is it the nutrition stuff? Is it hunting pressure? Is it, you know, like what factor is actually determining that I'm not seeing and getting the results of the rut that I always wanted? And then try and work that out. And then obviously implement strategies like what we've discussed in this podcast, but plenty of other ones before, to try and turn it around and actually get the opportunities you want. And that's where, like, I feel like for me, like Ayden's definitely, I would say, out of the two of us, like, as you probably heard, like that just persistent, but like we're both like one thing that I think we both are as well is like ridiculously like analytical to like when we're like it's all, I don't know how to describe, but it's like, why is this happening? Why is that happening? Like what, you know, even with like birds chirping, what Ayden was saying before, it's like, okay, why is that bird chirping differently and stuff? And so like trying to really break down as many features that could affect our hunt and the rut and activity and results and everything like that as much as you can. And then trying to swing or manipulate them into your favor is like something that we always try and do.
And that's where I think just being analytical definitely helps, but also like say to yourself, like if I could hunt today, like I've got the day off to hunt and another 2 or 3 days up my sleeve, rather than going home and sort of, yeah, as I said, because you know what the outcome is if you pack up and leave, like you're not shooting that animal, you are letting yourself down. And whether you can, you know, you're going to be able to live with it. I'm not saying hunting's the be all end all, but you will be disappointed and you will definitely get the feelings of, shit, why did I actually do that? Like, you know, I've worked so hard to try and get that time off. I've made so many other sacrifices, not even to you, your partner and kids and everyone else's sacrifice. You've missed that April, Easter, whatever already. So sometimes, like, even if you have to sit there and make a bit of like a conscious like deal with yourself and negotiate with yourself, like instead of being like, oh, I'm really tired, I'm going to sleep in till 9 a.m. today and then I'll go out hunting. Wake up at 3 a.m., get up early, do the hardest part of the morning when it's bitterly cold, get up there. And if they are making noise, you're going to hear them in the dark. You're going to have the best couple of hours to hopefully get in on a deer and then sleep throughout the whole middle of the day. If you have to sleep at some point in time to get your energy levels back up and be thinking clear and have better opportunities to hunt, it's like hunt the prime time, relax in the downtime. Don't, I'll sleep in tomorrow morning and then I'll like make it up. It's like, no. You do what the deer are doing and you do what the hunting is dictating. And that's where like you might be on a property that has no service. Hopefully you've got a Garmin InReach or something like that where you can message your spouse and message people and let them know you're safe each night or whatever's going on, you know, big buck down, whatever. But if you are genuinely lonely, like if you're like, oh, I'm never spending any time away from my kids and family, I've got a young family at home and I'm used to tucking them in at night, to bed at night. I'm used to coming home from work and kissing my wife or husband, whatever, and having a meal with them. And I am genuinely lonely. Like I'm doing what I love. I'm doing my bow hunting or hunting in general. And this should be amazing for me, but because it is tough, because it is hard, because you are in a caloric deficit, because you have been waking up early and you've probably traveled a couple of hours to get to the property, you are tired, you're not necessarily thinking straight. If you have to hunt in the morning and then drive 2 hours to the nearest town just to say, hey babe, I love you so much, like how are the kids doing, all that type of stuff, just to go out there and get a refresher and get a couple of days, buy some food, buy some good food with plenty of calories, buy yourself some fruit, like whatever it is, buy yourself junk food, I don't care, whatever it is to get you back in the hills. And this is like, I'll be completely open and sort of vulnerable here. Like I was experiencing this towards the end of my time in Catherine last year with some of my hunts. And I remember I didn't have service where I was, but I was genuinely one afternoon, I was doing long distance and I was thinking like, fuck, I work so hard and don't get that much time. Like maybe I should be with my partner. And she'd said, no, like stay in Catherine. Obviously, like I want you to go hunting because your time in Catherine's running out and I want you to go on a hunt and like really enjoy it. And I was like, yeah, beauty. Like having that confirmation from her was like awesome for me to go and give 100% to this hunt. But I'll not lie here where as soon as I got back to camp and it was dark and like obviously I wasn't thinking about where that big bull was or where that boar was or where whatever was and covering new ground and doing this and like preoccupied, I was like, fuck, I really miss her. Like, she is such a big part of my life, all this type of stuff. And I was sitting there and I was like, kind of contemplating, like, I was honestly thinking, like, do I drive a couple of hours just to talk to her? Because I was used to talking to her each night. Like, our communication was key, being long distance. And I made the rationalization with myself that if I left, I would get that comfort of talking to her, but I'd also be extremely disappointed in myself because I do work so hard and do get so little time off. And if I did leave, I would have, got the comfort that I was seeking. But instead, I just recorded a little video and shared that with her the next day when I got back into service after the hunt was done. And looking back on it, it's like, I think I did the perfect thing. And like, if I had have left, I genuinely would have been disappointed in myself. I would have obviously spoken to her and stuff, but then I would have had the long drive home being like, oh, I don't get much time to hunt. And I've wasted like a day that I'm now, back at home and could have been hunting. So I think there's definitely like a strength to, in the moment, just being able to be like, okay, I understand what I'm feeling here. Like, potentially you've just shot a fallow buck or a red stag and you're like, oh, you missed it, you backstrapped it, you shot over it. Fuck it, it's never going to happen for me. I'm not going to get another chance. I've slogged it for 20 days. It's like in hindsight or in retrospect, you should say, I've hunted for 20 days. I'm just piecing it out. I am so close to shooting a stag. Like, the thing that comes next from missing a stag is actually shooting a stag, because I've learned so much over the last 20 days, rather than, I've depleted all my resources, I'm at the end, my wit's end, like blah, blah, blah. It's just how you reframe things, how you think things. And that just massively comes back to like mental toughness. And again, it's nice hearing that James says, oh, you're disciplined and, you've got this like persistence and whatnot. But it's like, to be honest, without hunting with James, and like a lot of my hunting is either solo or with James, it's like, that's where having a good hunting buddy or someone that you can check in with, say you are out of service and you have a Garmin in reach, and it can be your partner, it can be your best mate, it can be a hunting buddy across the other side of the world. And if you just say, hey mate, like struggling or something like that, and they just say, keep going, like you're getting closer, mate, that's got so much power in it. And even like looking back at previous photos of a rut, or even if you write yourself a little note like hunt hard, and you just see that, like motivational video, photo, quote, whatever, can give you so much power to obviously just keep persisting and go on.
Yeah, I felt this. This wasn't meant to be about mental toughness, but it's become it. Definitely in my first US trip before Ayden case, I've done only 2 trips for elk. And second one, Ayden was obviously there. We've spoken about it a lot against all odds. Awesome trip. But the first one, public land, lost my bow for a couple of days, and ended up meeting a guy called Michael, who like is genuinely one of the sweetest people I've ever met, and like, owe a lot to him. But yeah, you're out there by yourself, like slogging it out, like huge country, like just for us, like probably New Zealanders can relate because they've got massive mountains over there. But like, there's nothing I've seen in Australia that even like compares to the mountain ranges and stuff in the US. And so, you're like, you're doing these backcountry hunts, like the density is super low, and like you're just getting like flogged, and you just, I don't know, like you just get down on yourself. And I remember just like, because I had an inReach and stuff, and every so often actually I get service, and you just send him a message and then like just get that little message back being like, and this is a guy that I've known for like 6 days, right? But you just like, me and him like click straight away, and he'd be like, man, I believe in you. I know you know what you're doing. Like you just keep flogging it out there, you get the result and stuff. And he's like, like just that like tiny little message, just like, I do know what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like it's just that tiny, it sort of gets you out of that rut. And that's where I think like what Ayden said, like reframing in those sort of dark moments, or where you like really getting down yourself, might be a couple of days into a hunt and you're just not getting the results or seeing the opportunities that you thought you'd be getting and stuff. And other people on socials, especially, it's bad for, like you're seeing other people shooting big bucks and big stags, and you really wanted to get one this year, and other people are getting all these opportunities and you're flogging yourself and not. It's just like, just sit down, take a minute, and yeah, just like really sort of try and analyze it and piece it all together. And like you do pull yourself out of it, but sometimes it's good having like that. I mean, yeah, like Ayden said, like it's good when we hunt together, but it's also, like it doesn't take much. Like there's been plenty of times where I've been hunting solo and it's just like, F this, F that, like, this. And then I'll call Ayden and just be like, mate, just relax. Like, you were like, you were 25 meters off a buck or a red stag or a thing. And it's like, you nearly shot it, or like, whatever. It's just like, you've done 99% of the work. And like what Ayden was saying, like when you're so close on these opportunities or like whatever, like you're generally normally one step away from shooting the thing that you want. So just like keep persisting. If you're not getting the results, then you need to change it up, be analytical, and hopefully that'll come to you. So, yeah.
And that's where, like, as we conclude this podcast, one of the biggest takeaways is it's not always like, it's amazing if you go out for the rut and you've got a couple of days up your sleeve and you shoot a PB buck on the first day, like amazing. But you can only do that so many times until it stops being like realistic. And that's where sometimes, as we've learned, as we've hunted more, these 10-day slogs, 5-day slogs, a weekend slog, month-long slogs in the case of the US, are some of the hunts that you remember most vividly because you learn so much about yourself as a human. And then you sort of, again, without making this a mental toughness podcast, but it sort of is so like relatable, you sort of like have a different appreciation of life in general, and you take so much stuff back. Like I remember going back from America and just really enjoying like a meal and a hot shower and stuff like that in my own bed. Whereas, you know, you sleep in a bed for the previous 365 days and it's almost like a chore going to bed because you can't be productive. Whereas after spending, you know, 20 odd days living on a little, you know, slanted hill where your head's like not even level and things like that, and it's cold and you're trying to fight for every single calorie, you're losing all these kilograms, you end up cherishing it. And it's just such like a learning curve. So I think, yeah, if you've set out time for the rut, hopefully this podcast comes out to you, you know, before the rut, before it is potentially, you know, not going your way. But just think about this podcast if you are going through a tough time in a couple of weeks, and just know that that next opportunity is probably closer than you think. Like the amount of times I've thought about quitting, like for example, that buffalo and boar hunt where I, you know, wanted to go out of service and leave and go home and call my partner and everything like that and ditch the trip. The next day, I hadn't seen a single pig that day. I'd seen a few buffalo. The next day, I ended up shooting 3 really nice boars with the bow, and just had an awesome trip. So, you know, your success is closer than you think. Just keep working towards it and it will happen.
With unmatched quality, performance and reputation, Aimright International is our go-to for spear guns, wetsuits and fins. Whether it be coral trout, wahoo or dogtooth tuna, Aimright has you covered on or in the water. Check them out today at their website. Well, hopefully you guys learnt something from the podcast. We just wanted to get this one out before the rut actually came around. Like we wanted it to be timely so that hopefully you could be either listen to it beforehand and have this in the back of your mind, just ticking along if things aren't going as well as you thought, or, you know, you might be driving out to go and actually hunt the rut when you first listen to this. So best of luck out there, but hopefully we've sort of got you a bit of a structure and some guidelines on the factors of why we think, you know, you might not be hearing or seeing what you hope to be seeing during the rut, but also ways that you might be able to deal with it and just increase the odds in your favor that just gets you that one opportunity or a few more opportunities that leads to some success. But we're actually going to dive into some FAQs. So as usual, if you guys have a frequently asked question, please email us at info@twinelements.com.au or send us a message at Twin Elements or Ayden or James Doumtsis Outdoors. So we try and keep it topic related for our FAQs, but our email inbox and also just on socials has been sort of filling up pretty quickly. So we've had Jared Thurley message these in quite a while ago, but we've been just answering like some specific ones to the topics that we've been going through, but we thought we better tackle it now because we're just getting so many messages coming through about FAQs. So the first one is, what size Yeti cooler do you use when out on your hunts?
So we currently run a 65 litre Yeti Tundra. Now this is sort of the Yeti that we use on most of our hunts. To be honest, we've both got like car fridges and stuff like that, which a lot of the time we'll set out like our solar as well and park somewhere that the cars are getting topped up if we're hunting from a car. If we are doing, you know, a backpack sort of trip, we're obviously not going to have the Yeti with us at like our camp or wherever we're going out to. But if it's like a base camp, we'll hopefully have the Yeti there ready to go for if we do shoot something, because meat retrieval, as you would have seen in all our videos and like heard us talk about, is one of the biggest things and one of the biggest reasons why we're hunting. So the fact that like one of the biggest things preparation wise when we are going on these trips is that before we ever put any food or any meat or anything into an esky, like we cool it down. So if it's just going to be used for food over a 3 or 4 day trip where we don't have refrigeration, we will often like pre-cool it, and then as soon as we chuck the food in it, we'll have ice bricks and try and leave it in a strategic spot. So either under the car or under a nice shady spot, something like that. And we've found that 65 litre Yeti Tundra is probably too big for most day or weekend trips. It's quite a good sized Yeti. but it's perfect for those like 3 or 4 day trips where you've got a bit of food. It can get a little bit shy of ice if you're opening it up, closing it, or it's particularly hot, like in the Northern Territory by like day 3 or 4. So that's where we'll often try and eat all the red meat and all the, protein and things like that, the veggies and the perishables. But generally everything else will stay pretty cool and fine over that duration. The biggest thing that we've also started implementing is for some of these trips, if we've got a car fridge, we'll leave the car fridge with the food. And then what we'll do with that Yeti 65 litre is just fill it chock-a-block full of ice, chuck it in the shade. And then by day 3 or 4, if it's a weekend sort of long trip or over a long weekend, and we do shoot something, it's still got ice in it, but it's actually melted down to a point where, and we're just removing the water each day or each morning and afternoon to keep the ice like intact, because it will obviously go down over that period. But we find that there's normally enough ice and that Yeti is cool enough to obviously get the meat that you shoot on that trip back home. And like we've found that the 65 litre Yeti is good enough for fitting most deers, like back legs and back straps and things like that. Would probably fit nearly a whole goat, would fit a small deer quite well. We do find that if you're hunting for like a larger deer, you might not be able to take all the ribs and all that type of stuff back, but we sort of, pack and shift it all and get pretty versatile with it. Even if we chuck the back legs and back straps in the cold Yeti and then all the ice that was in there, we chuck in like another, just a black sort of carry box or something like that, we'll do that as well. So to answer your question, Jared, we love our 65 litre Yeti Tundra. If you want bigger animals, you can go up. Yeti obviously have like a heap of ranges, and they've also got their little more portable like Yeti hoppers and things like that at the moment, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, I find that 65 litre size to be perfect. I've actually put a whole red deer, front legs, back legs, ribs in my one. It was pretty cramped. There wasn't much ice in there, I'm not going to lie. But yeah, definitely, like we obviously run car fridges as well now on those extended hunts because you can only keep ice for so long. But definitely for meat storage, it's a really handy one. Like having a couple of ice bricks actually frozen in the fridge in one of your sections. And then, you can chuck them out and then chuck some meat in there once you've cooled it down. But I just find whether it's like a day diving on the boat or whether it's like, just like a general hunt here in Australia, like that 65 litre Yeti is pretty primo for size. And we've had like days where it does last multiple days on ice. I mean, we should, for advertising purposes, say that, you put 1 cube in and it actually grows ice. No, not really. But Yeti, they do, like, the brand's obviously got a great reputation for their ice holding abilities and stuff like that. And certainly before we were running car fridges and that type of thing, like it was worth their weight in gold. And we actually now will use it as like a food storage thing as well, where we just have like sort of non-perishables in it. And then if we do need to use it for extra meat storage, we've got a couple of ice bricks and stuff in the freezer and just take out the food that's in there that we're going to eat, like muesli bars and stuff, and then just use the Yeti for meat and stuff too. So because it's easier to clean than your car fridges and everything like that. So it it's got a lot of utility and has definitely proven itself. Ours is melted, burnt, bloody everything, and it's still going awesome. So we love our Yeti.
Following on from that question, Jared sent in a follow-up question, and it is, do you eat the boars you hunt? What do you look for, if so, if you are going to eat them? Did you want to tackle that, James?
Yeah, I love wild pork. It's probably my favourite of the wild game meats, maybe also goat. But definitely love eating boars and pigs in general. So we'll do a massive discussion, I reckon, around the specifics of actually eating wild pork and goat and like all the risks and everything like that and venison in the future. But I definitely eat my boars. I find like I've eaten big old rank boars, ones that have rotted up and stuff like that. Speaking mainly, I'll actually turn them into mince or sausages because of the fat in them. They're just like ridiculously good eating. But my perfect, like if I was going to shoot a boar for eating size, it would be, roughly a 60 kilo boar because the yield's really good, but generally speaking, they're not like too rutted up at that stage. And ideally something that's been on like good feed. Like obviously everything eating quality wise comes back to, if you've got anything, like if you've got a cow or a lamb or anything in drought and like they're struggling to survive, they're obviously not going to have much fat, which affects eating quality and so on and so forth. So same with pork. Like if you've got a pig that you shoot that's eating on like an oat crop or like, just say in really good clover fields or whatever up on even on the side of the mountain, well, that's going to be a really good eating quality pig. So I find that, most of the pigs that I've eaten have been really good. I do try and take out, there's like a couple of glands in the back legs, like lymph nodes and stuff like that, which I'll remove. But never had really like a gamey boar or anything like that, even like ones that I've shot off rutting sows, just like really good conditioned pigs. But they're always really good. And there's a lot in terms of like checking organs and stuff like that and freezing process and stuff that we might just touch on in another podcast, because there is a lot in that. But you definitely want to know what you're doing when you're eating wild pork, but definitely something that's worth taking and pursuing when you're on the mountain.
Yeah, I think the short answer to this is like, yes, definitely. We do eat wild pork. There are certain trips, like I know that James was hunting some dairy properties up near Cairns and Milla and all these places up on the North Queensland tablelands, where these pigs were coming off dairy and just eating the leftover grain from the dairy cows. So they were, a 6-month-old pig that was weighing anywhere from, 50 to 80 kilos and just prime, like had a 1/4 of an inch of fat on their back and their hams, and it was just awesome for mince. And we had pork burgers, mince venison burgers that we were cutting in the wild pork, and roasts and all these types of things, pork tomahawks, like you name it, we were eating them. It was probably the best food that we were eating for a while. But there definitely is a sort of more sinister side to wild pork that you have to be careful of. And it's not necessarily to like scare people, but there are a lot more diseases and bacteria and things like that and parasites that can be in wild game. So it's just one of those things. We always try and freeze things for a couple of weeks, but we'll do a massive deep dive into wild pork and the dangers and risks and things like that associated with it, tips and strategies to prevent that and make sure that it's safe for yourself and your family, because as we've said, and hopefully you can take away from this, Jared, wild pork is some of the best meat you'll get. It's obviously quite fatty, but can taste really, really nice, like especially compared to that store-bought stuff. So thank you very much for your contribution, Jared. We really appreciate it. As James said, for anyone else looking to send in your FAQs, you know where to find us. Please send them in and we'll hopefully feature them on the podcast. And hopefully, we get these amazing questions that will hopefully benefit other people out there in the hunting community. So thank you very much today for listening to the Silent Rut and Raw podcast. Hopefully you've got a few takeaways from today's show. If you do get out over the coming few weeks, hopefully you can implement some of these strategies over March and April, and please keep us posted, share your images with us, share your stories with us. We'd love to, obviously share them on our page and let people know that we're affecting the Grady audience and hopefully increasing success out in the field. As you're listening to this, part 4 of our Fallow Rut film series, Fallow Frenzy, drops this coming Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. If you haven't, make sure you go back to episode 7 of the Twin Elements podcast, where we titled it Fallow Frenzy. James and I jumped in to all things film related. We talked behind the scenes moments from that film, what it's like to hunt with Nick Morton, as well as just a background on, the fallow in those parts. And we actually broke down each episode and gave, some insight, being completely vulnerable into what went well, what didn't go well, what you're seeing there in each of those stalks and things. So it's very much behind the scenes based and just gives you guys an insight into what it's like creating a Twin Elements hunting film.
Speaking of our YouTube channel, we've nearly got 20,000 subscribers on that, on the Twin Elements YouTube. So we are going to be doing a giveaway. Lola has kindly thrown in a pair of Ranger GTX 3 boots, which will be up for grabs. We're also going to talk to a couple of our other ambassadorship companies and get a bit of a prize pack for whoever wins this. It should turn out to be quite the giveaway. So stay tuned for that. You, as our loyal listeners, will definitely be the first to know. So stay tuned and keep coming into the podcast, and we'll drop the details shortly. But please remember to subscribe as well to the podcast, do a review or a comment, especially on that Spotify function where you can actually comment on the podcast. But we appreciate all the support that you guys are getting. We're getting so much feedback from everyone, just sending in FAQs. We're getting feedback, suggesting podcast topics and just saying how much they're appreciating all this sort of resource that we're putting out and how much they've learned from all the podcasts we've done. So thank you everyone for all the feedback. We really do appreciate it. It keeps us going, I guess. There is a lot of time put into these podcasts and YouTube videos. So getting those really nice messages from everyone saying how much they appreciate it. We from the bottom of our heart, we really do appreciate it. So thank you very much.
Thanks, team.